I've always believed that a mother's greatest joy is seeing her child stand on his own feet. That's what I used to tell myself during the long years I spent saving every penny, cutting corners, and working 2 shifts at the diner just to build a place we could finally call home. My name is Margaret Collins, and this story isn't just about a house. It's about trust, betrayal, and the silence that taught me strength. I wasn't born into wealth. I grew up in a small town in Ontario where the winters were harsh and dreams often froze before they bloomed. My husband, Richard, passed away when our only son, Ethan, was 16. Losing Richard shattered me, but I had no choice except to keep going. I wanted Ethan to have the life we never had, a safe home, a good education, a place to belong. After Richard's funeral, I remember sitting alone at the kitchen table with a calculator and tears in my eyes. I told myself, "You're not going to fall apart, Margaret. You're going to build something for your boy." That was the beginning. 4 years, I worked at the Maple Leaf Diner, the kind of place where the coffee was always warm and the regulars always had a story. I waitressed during the day, cleaned offices at night, and saved every tip, every extra dollar. I come home with aching feet, but my heart stayed strong. Every time I looked at Ethan sleeping in his tiny room, I whispered, "Someday, son, this will all be yours." After 10 long years, that dream finally took shape. A modest but beautiful 2-story home just outside Toronto. Cream-colored bricks, white windowsills, and a little garden where roses would bloom every summer. I called it the Haven. When I held the keys in my hand for the first time, I cried like a child. It wasn't just a building. It was the result of every sacrifice, every lonely night, every prayer whispered into the dark. And when I gave Ethan a tour of his new room, he hugged me and said, "Mom, I'll make you proud. This house will always be yours, if only promises lasted forever." Years passed, and Ethan grew into a fine young man, kind-hearted, ambitious, and gentle. After finishing college, he got a job in finance. I couldn't stop smiling when he told me, "Mom, you can finally rest. Let me take care of you now." But I didn't realize that when he said, "take care," he'd later mean taking everything. That's when Olivia entered our lives. She was beautiful, graceful in that polished, city girl way. Her laughter filled the room, and she always knew what to say to make people like her. Ethan met her at work, and after just 6 months, he said they were getting married. It felt sudden, but I wanted to trust my son's heart. I told him, "If she makes you happy, that's all that matters." The wedding was small but lovely. Olivia's family, her parents, Henry and Diane Parker, came from Vancouver. They were polite but distant, the kind of people who smiled with their mouths, not their eyes. Her mother complimented the house several times, saying, "Such a cozy place, Margaret. You really did well for yourself." But the way she looked around, it was as if she was inspecting something she already owned. After they got married, things slowly began to change. The laughter in the house faded, replaced by closed doors and quiet arguments. Olivia began making subtle comments about the decor, the location, even the furniture. One night, I overheard her say to Ethan, "It's embarrassing living in your mom's old-fashioned house. Don't you think we deserve something that's ours?" He didn't answer right away. That silence told me everything. From that moment, I felt something shifting, a coldness creeping into the walls I had built with love. They stopped eating dinner with me. When I'd ask about their day, Olivia would give vague answers. Then one evening, I came home from the grocery store and found them whispering at the kitchen table. The moment they saw me, they stopped talking. Papers were spread out, legal papers. "Everything okay?" I asked, pretending not to notice. "Yeah, Mom," Ethan said quickly, folding the papers. "Just some work stuff," but I knew that tone. I had heard it before, when he lied about skipping school years ago. My mother's instinct screamed that something wasn't right. A few weeks later, Olivia's parents started visiting more often. They'd come over for dinner, uninvited, acting like the place was theirs. Henry would sit on the porch, talking about future expansions, while Diane critiqued the garden. I stayed polite, but my patience thinned each day. One Saturday afternoon, I came into the living room to find Henry measuring the walls with a tape measure. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Oh, just checking the dimensions," he said casually. "You never know when renovations might be needed." Renovations. I thought, this is my house. When I confronted Ethan later, he said, "Mom, relax. He's just helping us plan for the future." I smiled weakly, but inside my stomach twisted. A future? What kind of future involved my home? Then the betrayal came, quietly, like a thief in the night. I was paying bills one morning when I received a letter from the local property office. It mentioned a transfer of ownership request. My hands trembled as I read it. The letter said that my house had been gifted to Ethan Collins, and that a further transfer was in process to Henry and Diane Parker. Gifted? I never signed anything. I never gave anyone permission. I rushed into Ethan's room, the papers shaking in my hand. "Ethan, what is this?" I demanded. He froze. Olivia appeared behind him, her face calm. Too calm. "Mom," he began. We thought it would be easier this way. You're getting older and what?" I snapped. "You decided to take what's mine without asking." Olivia stepped forward, her voice sweet but sharp. "Margaret, you always said the house would be Ethan's someday. We just made it official." Something inside me broke that moment. Not just my trust, but the illusion that love always protects. I walked out before they could say another word. The walls of my home, once filled with warmth, now echoed with betrayal. That night, I sat in my car, parked down the street, staring at the glowing windows of the house I built. "My house," I whispered. "They think I'm weak. They think I won't fight. But they don't know me. Because here's the truth. I might have stayed silent that day, but silence for me is never surrender. It's preparation. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak in the house, every car that passed outside, it all sounded like whispers of betrayal. My mind replayed Ethan's words again and again. We just made it official. Official? He had no idea what that word meant to me. Everything I had done, every dollar, every sacrifice was official long before papers ever existed. My name, printed on that title, wasn't just ink. It was proof of my life's work, my love, my loyalty. When dawn finally came, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee, staring at the sunlight hitting the framed family photo on the wall. It was taken 3 years ago, before Olivia, before the distance, before my son learned to look at me like I was a burden. Ethan's arm was around me then, and he smiled like the boy who once promised, "I'll make you proud, Mom." Now that boy was gone. The next day, I visited the property registrar's office downtown. The woman behind the counter wore thick glasses and spoke in a tone that reminded me of a teacher explaining a bad grade. "Mrs. Collins, it says here a transfer was initiated, but the deed itself hasn't been updated. Legally, the property still belongs to you." I froze. "What do you mean? It hasn't been updated?" She looked closer at the papers. "Well, it seems someone tried to file a transfer form, claiming it was a gift, but without your verified signature. It was rejected due to lack of proper authorization." I felt a small, trembling relief spread through my chest. "So the house is still mine?" "Yes, ma'am. You're the only registered owner." Those words, "you're the only registered owner," became the seed of something powerful inside me. Hope. I thanked her, took copies of every document she offered, and walked out of that building with my head high. They wanted to play games. Fine. But they'd underestimated one thing, a mother's patience. That evening, when I came home, the atmosphere had changed. Olivia was on the phone, laughing softly, while Ethan sat on the couch, scrolling through his laptop. They didn't even notice I'd walked in. I set my purse down quietly and said, "I went to the property office today." Ethan froze. Olivia's smile faded. "I know what you tried to do," I continued. "You both filed a fake transfer. The office rejected it." Ethan stood up, defensive. "Mom, it's not fake. You said before that the house would be mine one day. We just wanted to." "To what?" I interrupted. "Steal it before I die." Olivia's tone turned sharp. "That's not fair, Margaret. You're overreacting. It's just paperwork." I laughed bitterly. "Just paperwork? Then why were your parents ready to move in next month?" Her expression faltered. Ethan looked at her, confused. "Move in?" he asked. "What is she talking about?" "Oh, so he didn't know that part." Her silence confirmed everything. "Don't play innocent," I said quietly. "I've seen the messages. You showed the house photos to your parents, talked about renovations, and even called it your new home. You planned to take everything." Olivia's voice cracked. "Margaret, please." "No," I said firmly. "Enough. From now on, you'll both treat this house with respect. You live here because I allow it, not because you own it. Understand?" Ethan looked at me with a mix of anger and shame. "Mom, why are you doing this? You're tearing the family apart." I looked him straight in the eyes. "No, Ethan. You did that when you chose greed over gratitude." For the next few weeks, the house became colder than ever. We still shared the same roof, but silence was the loudest sound. Meals were eaten separately. Doors closed harder. Olivia avoided me entirely, while Ethan's words grew fewer each day. I acted calm, peaceful even, but inside, I was building something far stronger than anger. I started documenting everything. Every email, every message, every whisper that might later prove the truth. I even visited an old friend, Robert Hale, a retired lawyer who used to handle Richard's contracts years ago. His office was small, filled with dust and coffee-stained files, but his mind was still sharp. When I told him the whole story, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Margaret, you've got enough here to expose them completely, but you'll need patience." Patience? I smiled. "I've been patient my whole life." He nodded. "Good, because when the time comes, you'll want everything lined up, proof, witnesses, a will. And make sure you change your will now, before they try anything else." That evening, I sat by the fireplace, pen in hand, writing my new will. My heart ached as I wrote Ethan's name, not in the inheritance section, but under excluded beneficiaries. The house would go only to those who truly loved me. I didn't know yet who that would be, but I knew one thing, it wouldn't be them. Weeks turned into months. Ethan and Olivia's relationship started to show cracks. The same greed that had poisoned our home began poisoning theirs. I overheard arguments about money, about control, about her parents always interfering. One night, I heard Olivia yelling, "Your mother will never give us that house, not unless she's gone." Her words hit me like a slap. Ethan shouted back, "Don't talk about her like that." It gave me a small, bittersweet satisfaction. Somewhere deep down, maybe my son still had a heart left. But by morning, the distance between us grew again. He avoided my eyes at breakfast, while Olivia stayed in their room, pretending to sleep. I went about my chores, pretending not to hear their whispers, but inside, I was waiting for their next move. And their next move came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, I received a call from a real estate agent. "Mrs. Collins," she said politely, "I just wanted to confirm that you decided to sell your property on Maple Drive." My grip tightened on the phone. "What did you just say?" She hesitated. "We received a call earlier from your son, Ethan Collins. He said you'd authorized him to list the house for sale. I just wanted to double check before proceeding." My blood ran cold. They were trying again, not just to take it, but to sell it. "Thank you for calling," I said calmly. "Please don't take any further action. You've just saved me from from a terrible mistake. When I hung up, I stared at the window for a long time, my reflection blurred by the afternoon light. They thought they could outsmart me. They thought I was just an old woman clinging to the past. But what they didn't realize was that my silence wasn't fear, it was strategy. I wasn't going to confront them this time. Not yet. I was going to let them walk right into their own trap. Because when betrayal blooms, it eventually bears fruit. And I was patient enough to harvest every piece of it. The days that followed the real estate call were some of the hardest of my life. Every moment I spent under that roof felt heavier, like breathing air tainted with deceit. Yet I kept my calm. I smiled at breakfast, watered the roses, and even asked Olivia about her work as though nothing had happened. Because I knew, when you're surrounded by snakes, sudden movements only make them strike faster. Inside, though, I was boiling. Every time I saw Ethan, I had to stop myself from screaming. My own son, the boy I had raised with sleepless nights and empty stomachs, was trying to sell the very home I built for him. I began my quiet investigation. First, I went through the household mail, and sure enough, there were letters from real estate offices addressed to Ethan Collins, homeowner. I opened one, hence trembling. It was a property valuation notice. They were planning to list it for over $480,000. My life savings, reduced to a dollar figure on paper. Later that night, when they were out, I went through the filing cabinet in the living room. The one Ethan had claimed was just for bills. Inside, neatly stacked, were copies of forged documents, a false gift deed, and a printed letter of authorization, supposedly signed by me. I held those papers under the lamplight, my eyes filling with tears. The signature wasn't even close to mine, and yet it was enough to fool anyone who didn't look carefully. My hands shook, but I smiled. So this is your plan, Olivia. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought age had made me blind. But they had forgotten one thing. Mothers remember every detail, every curve of their name, every corner of their home. The next morning, I visited Robert Hale again. When I handed him the documents, he frowned, running a finger over the forged signature. This is bad, he said. They're trying to commit fraud, but if you stay quiet, they'll think they've succeeded. Let them continue, Margaret. Let them believe the house is slipping through your fingers. The more they do, the easier it'll be to expose them. I looked at him, a slow smile spreading across my face. You want me to play along? Exactly, he said. Silence can be the loudest evidence. And so I began my act. At home, I pretended to grow weary, frail, and forgetful. I let Ethan handle the bills, let Olivia plan her little renovation ideas. I even pretended not to notice when she invited her parents over again to discuss plans. They started talking more openly around me, as if I were invisible. Olivia's mother, Diane, would say things like, once this house is officially in your name, dear, you can rent out the upper floor. That'll give you some good income. Her husband, Henry, would nod and say, yes, yes, we can repaint the entire exterior once Margaret moves to that senior home she's been talking about. Senior home. I bit my tongue, so hard I tasted blood. I'd never mentioned moving anywhere. That was their fantasy, not mine. But I stayed quiet, even kind. I'd make tea for them, smile politely, and listen as they planned my own eviction. Each word they spoke became another nail in the coffin they were building for themselves. One evening, while they sat laughing in the living room, I quietly slipped into Ethan's office. On his desk, I found an envelope with a logo I recognized, Lawson and Burke Realty. Inside was a draft sale agreement, naming the sellers as Ethan and Olivia Collins, and the buyers as a couple from Calgary. I took photos of every page with my phone. The price, the signatures, even the realtor's contact number, everything. Then, I carefully put it all back exactly as I found it. That night, I called Robert again. It's time, I said simply. He chuckled on the other end. Good. I'll prepare the legal notice. But Margaret, when the storm hits, don't soften your heart. Not even for your son. My silence answered for me. A week later, Ethan came into the kitchen one morning with a false smile. Mom, he began softly, I think it's time we helped you move somewhere quieter. You deserve peace, you know. Maybe a nice retirement home near the lake. I kept stirring my tea, pretending to think. Oh, that sounds lovely, dear. But before that, can I ask you something? Of course, he said, relaxing a little. Why did you lie to me? He froze. What do you mean? I turned to him, eyes steady. You and Olivia, the fake documents, the real estate calls, the forged signature. You try to sell my home, Ethan. Why? His face drained a color. Mom, I don't. Before he could finish, Olivia walked in. Margaret, this isn't a good time. No, Olivia, I said coldly. It's the perfect time. I placed a folder on the table, copies of every fraudulent document, side by side with the official property record showing my name as the legal owner. This, I said, tapping the papers, is what you both did. And this, I lifted another paper, my newly notarized will, is what comes next. Olivia's eyes widened. What's that? My final say, I replied. This house belongs only to those who truly loved me. That's what it says. And when I die, every cent of its value will go to charity. Not to you, not to your parents, not to anyone who betrayed me. Ethan's voice cracked. Mom, you can't. I already have, I interrupted. Then I stood up and said, you both got a choice. Stay here under my roof as guests you respected, or leave before the law makes that decision for you. Olivia opened her mouth to speak, but Ethan stopped her. His shoulders sagged and his eyes dropped to the floor. Mom, he whispered, I didn't mean for it to go this far. Yes, I said quietly. You did. You just didn't expect me to fight back. That night, the house was silent. No whispers, no laughter, no plotting. Just the sound of the wind through the windows and my own steady heartbeat. I went to my bedroom, opened the top drawer of my dresser, and placed the official deed on top of everything else. Then I locked it. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. Because now, it wasn't fear that filled the air, it was control. And I knew this was only the beginning. The storm had finally started to turn, and for once, it was turning in my favor. For a while after that confrontation, the house felt eerily peaceful. Too peaceful, like the quiet that comes right before a storm breaks loose. Ethan and Olivia barely spoke to me. They avoided the kitchen when I was there, and when we crossed paths in the hallway, they only exchanged brief, cold nods. The silence wasn't comforting, it was tense, heavy with unspoken resentment. But that was fine. Silence was my territory now, because while they sulked, I planned. I had already secured copies of every forged paper, every email, every message. Robert, my lawyer friend, had filed a confidential complaint with the fraud division of the county office. But he told me, Margaret, let them keep moving. The deeper they dig, the more dirt they'll bury themselves in. So I waited. Days turned into weeks. I acted polite. I brought coffee to the table in the mornings, smiled faintly, and pretended not to notice when Olivia avoided eye contact. I even asked her how work was going one evening. She looked startled, then muttered something about being too busy with family matters. Family matters. If only she knew what family really meant. One chilly Friday afternoon, I decided to take a walk to clear my head. The autumn air in Toronto had that crisp bite, the kind that made you feel alive and aware. As I walked down the neighborhood, I saw the maple leaves falling across the street, their colors fiery red and gold. That's when my neighbor, Mrs. Dalton, waved from her porch. Margaret, haven't seen you in ages. Everything all right? I smiled weakly. Just busy, you know how it is. She tilted her head. I ran into a couple earlier, said they were looking to move into your place. Thought you were selling. My heart skipped a beat. A couple? Yes, she nodded. A nice young man and woman. They said they were meeting your son later to discuss the price. I felt the blood rush from my face. They're doing it again. This time, I didn't go home immediately. I went straight to Robert's office. He listened carefully, tapping his pen on the desk. They're moving faster than I expected, he said. We'll take the next step. I'll draft a cease and desist notice and send it to every realtor within 20 miles. No one will touch this property without your signature. I nodded. And the couple? Don't worry, he said. They'll learn soon enough who really owns that house. Then, he handed me an envelope. This is your official deed verification certificate. Stamped, dated, and authenticated. Keep it safe. If things turn ugly, this piece of paper will silence everyone. I took it, holding it close like a shield. Thank you, Robert, for everything. He smiled faintly. You don't owe me thanks. Just promise me one thing. Don't show mercy to people who used your love as leverage. I looked him in the eye. Mercy is for the innocent. That night, when I returned home, the house was dark. Only the faint sound of laughter came from the living room. Ethan and Olivia watching a show, pretending everything was normal. I walked past them quietly and placed the certificate inside my dresser drawer next to my will. Then I locked it again. From the hallway, I could hear Olivia whispering. She's acting strange lately. Ethan sighed. She's old, Liv. Let's just wait it out. Once she's gone, it's ours anyway. Once she's gone. The words hit me like a blade, clean and deep. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door. Every instinct in me wanted to burst in and scream. But instead, I turned away. Because the truth was, they weren't just planning to take my home. They were waiting for me to disappear. And that was never going to happen. The next morning, I left early and visited the courthouse. Robert had already arranged for the fraud claim to move forward. The clerk at the desk recognized my name and said, Mrs. Collins, the documents you submitted have been processed. If any unauthorized sale attempt is made, you'll be immediately notified. It was official now. The system itself was on my side. As I stepped outside, the wind brushed against my face, carrying with it a faint sense of freedom. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. The fight wasn't over, but at least I wasn't fighting in the dark anymore. Still, I knew Ethan and Olivia wouldn't stop easily. Greed rarely does. And I was right. That Sunday, when I came back from church, I noticed a luxury car parked outside, a silver BMW. Through the living room window, I saw Olivia's parents inside, chatting comfortably with her and Ethan. I walked in quietly, and their laughter stopped immediately. Margaret, Diane said, standing. We were just discussing some family business. I'm sure you were, I replied, taking off my coat slowly. Would this family business involve my house again, by any chance? Her husband, Henry, chuckled awkwardly. Oh, come on now, Margaret. Let's not make a big deal out of paperwork. You're getting older. It makes sense to pass things on. I smiled faintly. You're right, Henry. It does make sense when it's done honestly. Olivia glared at me. You're trying to make us look like villains, Margaret. All we ever wanted was a secure future for your son. My son, I said softly. Or yourselves. The silence that followed was heavy. Even Ethan didn't defend her this time. He just stared at the floor, guilt flickering in his eyes. I turned to leave, but paused at the doorway. Enjoy your evening, I said calmly. Just don't get too comfortable. The court may have something to say about your family business soon. Their faces turned pale. I didn't wait to see what they'd say next. That night, as I sat alone in my room, I thought about everything. The laughter that used to fill this house, the dreams I had when I first built it, the son I once knew. I wanted to cry, but the tears didn't come anymore. My grief had hardened into to resolve. I whispered to myself, they think I'm alone, but I have the truth. And truth doesn't need company, it only needs time. The clock ticked slowly. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. But I felt no fear, because deep inside I knew. My silence wasn't just waiting anymore. It was the sound of justice gathering strength. The following week was colder than usual. The November wind crept through the cracks in the windows, sharp and restless, almost as if it carried warnings. The days felt heavy, but I didn't let it show. I moved through the house quietly, calmly, while my enemies under my own roof grew careless. Ethan and Olivia had started whispering again, planning something. I noticed how often he checked his phone, and how she stayed on calls with her parents for hours. Every time I entered the room, the conversation stopped. They thought I was fading, that I'd grown tired, that my silence meant surrender. But no one realizes how powerful a calm woman can be until she decides to strike. 3 days later, I received a call from the property registrar's office. The woman on the other end sounded cautious. Mrs. Collins, I wanted to confirm, did you recently approve an electronic e-transfer request? I took a deep breath. No, I did not. That's what I thought, she said. We flagged it. Someone tried to upload a digital authorization form under your name again. But this time, it was immediately rejected. Can you tell me who filed it? Yes. It came from an account under the name of Ethan Collins. I thanked her and hung up, my heart pounding, not from shock, but from pure, sharp focus. It was time. That night, I sat by the fireplace, waiting for Ethan to come home. The flames flickered in gold and orange, lighting up the framed photos on the mantel, memories of a happier time that now felt like lies. When the door opened, Ethan stepped in looking tired. I could smell the faint trace of whiskey on him. Long day? I asked softly. He nodded, loosening his tie. Yeah, work's been stressful. Work? I smiled faintly. Or fraud? His head snapped up. What are you talking about? I stood, holding the printed email I'd received from the registrar's office. This. You try to transfer my deed again, Ethan. Do you think I'm that easy to fool? He went pale. Mom, listen. No, I interrupted, my voice trembling with emotion. You listen. I gave you everything. I raised you alone. I built this house with my own hands. And you tried to sell it like it was a piece of furniture you didn't like anymore. He looked away, guilt flickering across his face. Olivia said, stop. I raised my hand. Stop blaming her. You're not a child anymore. You made your choice. And now, you'll live with the consequences. He took a hesitant step forward. Please, Mom, let's talk about this. I turned away. The time for talking is over, Ethan. You'll hear from my lawyer tomorrow. The sound of those words seemed to hit him like a slap. You're suing your own son, he whispered. I looked at him, really looked at him, and said, no, Ethan. I'm holding him accountable. There's a difference. The next morning, Robert filed a lawsuit, property fraud and attempted deed forgery. The papers were delivered to the house by noon. When the courier arrived, Olivia answered the door, smiling brightly until she saw the envelope marked official court summons. Her face drained of color. What is this? I walked up behind her and said calmly, justice knocking. She tore open the envelope, skimmed the first few lines, and gasped. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm serious, I replied. You tried to take everything from me. Now, I'll take back my peace and let the law handle the rest. Ethan came out of the kitchen, confused. What's happening? Olivia threw the papers at him. Your mother's suing us. He looked at the documents, his hands shaking. Mom, please don't do this. I didn't do this, Ethan, I said softly. You did, when you chose greed over family. Word spread quickly in our neighborhood. People whispered. Some pitied me, others applauded my courage. But I didn't care about their opinions. I only cared about truth. In the following days, Robert gathered all the evidence, the forged signatures, the realtor's call records, the attempted transfers. The court accepted everything. A hearing date was set for early December. The night before the hearing, Ethan came to my room. I was sitting by the window, writing in my journal. Mom, he said quietly, his voice trembling, I messed up. I didn't mean to hurt you. I wanted to make Olivia happy. I closed my notebook and looked up at him. At what cost, Ethan? Your mother's trust, your own dignity. He wiped his eyes. I know you hate me. No, I said, my tone softening. I don't hate you. I hate what you became when you stopped listening to your heart. For a moment, we just stared at each other, two people bound by blood but separated by betrayal. Then, he turned and left, closing the door behind him. I whispered after him, you'll learn, my son. Life always teaches what love couldn't. The day of the hearing arrived gray and cold. I wore my best coat, the same one I'd worn to Richard's funeral years ago. It felt symbolic, somehow. Another burial, this time of trust, not life. Ethan and Olivia sat across the courtroom, pale and silent. Olivia's parents were there too, whispering to each other with nervous smiles. When my name was called, I stood tall. Robert spoke first, laying out every document, every signature, every false transfer attempt. He showed the timeline, the intent, and finally, the proof that the property had never been transferred, that I was still the rightful legal owner. When he finished, the judge turned to Ethan. Mr. Collins, do you deny these claims? Ethan swallowed hard. No, Your Honor. I made a mistake. Olivia glared at him, whispering harshly, don't admit it. But it was too late. The truth had already escaped. The judge nodded slowly. Then this court finds in favor of Mrs. Margaret Collins. The property remains solely under her ownership, and all fraudulent attempts are hereby nullified. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room. Bang. Final. Undeniable. As As we stepped out of the courtroom, the cold winter air hit my face, but it felt clean, pure. Olivia stormed ahead, furious, while Ethan lingered behind. "Mom," he said softly, "I'm sorry." I looked at him, eyes tired but steady. "I believe you, Ethan, but sometimes sorry isn't enough. Sometimes it's just the start of learning who you really are." He nodded, tears glistening, then turned away. I walked to my car, each step heavy with relief. I had fought for my home, but more than that, I had fought for my dignity. And for the first time in years, I felt like I truly owned both. That night, as I stood on my porch watching the first snow fall, I whispered to the wind, "This house belongs to those who loved me." And love, it seems, was never theirs to claim. The lights inside glowed warm behind me. The haven, my home, stood untouched, unbroken, and fully mine once more. For a while after the court hearing, I thought peace would finally return to my life. The judgment had been made. The property was mine beyond dispute. Justice had spoken. Yet, peace doesn't always follow justice. Sometimes, it comes long after the wounds stop bleeding. Ethan and Olivia still lived in the house. The judge hadn't ordered them to move out since. Legally, they were family members and had nowhere else to go. I didn't want to throw my own son out on the street, not yet. I thought maybe, just maybe, he changed, realized the depth of what he'd done. But people who taste greed once rarely forget its flavor. The first few days after the ruling were quiet. Too quiet. Ethan avoided me entirely, and Olivia acted as if I were invisible. Her pride wouldn't let her admit defeat. She still strutted around the kitchen like she owned it, slamming cupboards a little too loudly, stomping up the stairs as if every step was an insult. One evening, I overheard her on the phone with her mother. Her voice was low, but sharp with venom. "She humiliated us in court, Mom. I can't stay here much longer. I swear I'll make her regret it." Those words stayed in my mind like a stain. I didn't confront her, not yet. I'd learned that confrontation gave her power. Instead, I observed. I watched her every move, listened to every whisper. And the more I saw, the more I realized she wasn't done trying to destroy me. 2 weeks later, I found proof. It was a cold Saturday morning when I noticed Olivia's laptop left open on the dining table. Normally, I'd never touch someone else's things, but something told me to look. My gut, that old mother's instinct that had saved me countless times before, whispered, "Check." On the screen was an email draft addressed to her parents. It read, "If we can't take the house legally, we'll have to make her leave. Ethan's too weak to stand up to her. I'll handle it my way." My hands trembled as I read it. Make her leave. The words echoed like a thunderclap. What was she planning? I quickly snapped a photo with my phone and closed the laptop. My heart pounded as I sat there, staring at the walls of my home, the home she wanted me gone from. I realized then, the war wasn't over. It had simply gone underground. Later that evening, when Ethan returned from work, I asked him to sit down. "Ethan," I said quietly, "I need to ask you something. Has Olivia said anything about leaving?" He looked up from his phone, frowning. "What do you mean? Don't play dumb. I know she's angry about the ruling. I heard her talking to her parents again." He sighed. "Mom, can we please not do this right now? I'm exhausted. Olivia's upset, yeah, but she's not plotting anything." I wanted to believe him, but the image of that email wouldn't leave my mind. "Ethan," I said carefully, "I love you, but you need to understand something. That woman is using you. She's never loved you, not the way a wife should. To her, you're just a key to this house." He stood up suddenly, his chair scraping the floor. "Enough, Mom. You don't know her like I do." "Oh, I know her better than you ever will," I said coldly. "I know her kind, and I know what she's capable of." He clenched his fists, his voice shaking. "You've already taken everything from us. Can't you just let us live?" I stared at him, stunned. "Taken everything? Ethan, you tried to steal from me." He didn't answer. He just turned and walked away. Upstairs, a door slammed hard. The house fell silent again. But this time, the silence wasn't calm. It was the sound of love breaking into pieces. That night, I sat awake long after midnight, staring at the faint light glowing under their bedroom door. My heart ached, not with anger anymore, but with sorrow. How could a mother love so much and lose so completely? I thought of Richard, my late husband, and whispered to the dark, "If you can hear me, please guide our son. He's lost in a storm I can't pull him from." Tears burned my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I had cried enough for one lifetime. A few days later, another storm began to brew, this time from outside. Robert called me that afternoon. His voice was serious. "Margaret, I just got notice. Olivia filed a complaint against you." "Against me?" I repeated, stunned. "Yes," he said grimly. "She's claiming emotional harassment, saying you've been threatening her, making her feel unsafe." I almost laughed at the absurdity. "She's the one who tried to take my home." "I know," he said, "but people like her don't stop until they're cornered. Don't worry, she doesn't have a case, but we'll need to appear for a mediation hearing next week." My stomach tightened. It wasn't fear this time, it was fatigue. She was trying to drain me emotionally, to wear me down, but I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. At the hearing, Olivia arrived wearing all white, pretending to be the picture of innocence. Ethan stood beside her, looking miserable. The mediator asked if she had any evidence. She handed over printed messages, text screenshots, but every one of them was fabricated, poorly edited. When it was my turn, I calmly handed over the photo of her email draft, the one she'd written about making me leave. The room went silent. The mediator read it twice, then looked up at Olivia. "Mrs. Collins," he said carefully, "can you explain this?" Her face turned turned white. That's fake. She's lying. But Ethan's expression gave her away. His eyes widened as he looked at the photo, then slowly turned to her. Olivia, what is this? She stammered. It was just enough, the mediator said firmly. This session is dismissed. Mrs. Collins, you're free to go. I stood, gathered my papers, and looked at Olivia one last time. Be careful what fires you start, dear, I said softly. Sometimes the smoke chokes you first. That evening, Ethan came to my room again. He didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, in a broken whisper, he said, You were right, Mom. About her. About everything. I looked up at him, heart aching. What happened? She laughed, he said. Packed her things and left this morning. Said she couldn't live with a liar. I nodded slowly. And how do you feel? He swallowed hard. Empty. I reached out and touched his hand gently. Then maybe that emptiness is where you'll finally grow again. For the first time in months, he didn't pull away. He just sat there beside me, quiet, like the little boy who once promised he'd make me proud. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of his redemption. The morning after Olivia left, the house felt different. Still, quiet, heavy, but peaceful, like a battlefield after the smoke clears. For the first time in months, I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, even the birds outside the window. It was strange how silence, once filled with tension, could suddenly sound like freedom. Ethan didn't come out of his room for hours. I didn't disturb him. I knew the weight of regret. I had lived with it before. Sometimes, silence teaches lessons that words never can. I spent the day cleaning. Every corner, every surface, every space that had absorbed their deceit. It wasn't just cleaning, it was cleansing. As I wiped down the kitchen counter, I found a photo tucked behind the toaster. Ethan and Olivia, smiling, holding champagne glasses on their wedding day. For a moment, my chest ached. I remember that day vividly. I'd been so proud, so hopeful. I almost threw the picture away. But then I paused. No, I thought, let it stay. Not as a memory of betrayal, but as a reminder of how easily love can blind us. That evening, Ethan finally came downstairs. His eyes were red, and his voice was soft when he said, Mom, can we talk? I nodded and set the kettle on. Sit down, sweetheart. He hesitated before speaking. I didn't realize how much I'd changed. I thought I was protecting my marriage, but I was destroying my family instead. I poured tea for both of us and said quietly, love can be blinding when it's built on guilt instead of honesty. You thought you were choosing her, but you were really abandoning yourself. He looked down, his voice breaking. I just wanted someone to love me, Mom. I felt that deep in my bones. And she did, I said softly, but not in the way you deserve. Real love doesn't ask you to hurt the people who raised you. It doesn't make you prove loyalty by choosing sides. He nodded, tears forming again. I don't expect you to forgive me. I reached across the table and touched his hand. Forgiveness isn't something I do for you, Ethan. It's something I do for me. I need peace, not pain. He looked up, surprised. You can really forgive me after all that? I smiled sadly. I can forgive you, yes, but I'll never forget. There's a difference. The following weeks were slow and quiet. Ethan started helping around the house again, mowing the lawn, fixing the leaky faucet, even repainting the fence. It was his way of rebuilding trust, one act at a time. Sometimes, I'd catch him staring at the front door, lost in thought. Maybe he was waiting for Olivia to come back. Or maybe, deep down, he was relieved she never would. One afternoon, as I tended to the roses in the garden, he joined me silently. We worked side by side, trimming branches and pulling weeds. After a long while, he said, Mom, do you ever regret giving me everything? I stopped thinking. No, I said slowly. I regret not teaching you sooner what everything means. He looked confused. What do you mean? I smiled faintly. When you give someone everything, your love, your trust, your sacrifice, they start to think they're entitled to it. They forget it's a gift. You took my love for granted because you thought it would always be there. But love, my son, isn't infinite when it's abused. He nodded, shame filling his eyes. I understand that now. Good, I said, because understanding is the first step toward redemption. Later that night, I went through the old box of letters and papers I kept in my dresser, bills, mortgage receipts, and the original property title. I reread each line, feeling a strange mixture of pride and sadness. It had taken me half a lifetime to build what others tried to steal in a few months. But as I looked at my son sleeping on the couch downstairs, the same couch he used to fall asleep on after watching cartoons as a boy, I realized something. Maybe this house wasn't just a home anymore. Maybe it was a symbol, a lesson, proof that love, even when betrayed, can still rebuild itself if given the chance. A week later, Ethan received divorce papers from Olivia. He didn't look surprised when he handed them to me. She's gone for good, he said quietly. I nodded. Good. Sometimes the worst endings are the best beginnings. He half smiled. That's something you'd say. It's something I've lived, I replied. He looked at me for a long moment and said, Mom, do you think you'll ever trust me again? I took a deep breath. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. It's like a cracked wall. Even when you patch it, the line remains. But one day you'll earn it back, not through words, through time. He nodded, tears welling again. Then I'll spend the rest of my life trying. That evening, we had dinner together for the first time in months. Just the two of us. No tension, no lies, no masks. As we ate, I noticed how quiet the house had become. But it wasn't the silence of conflict anymore. It was the silence of healing. After dinner, he helped me wash the dishes. When we finished, I looked around at the warm kitchen light, the sound of water dripping, the faint hum of life returning. Do you know what I realized? eyes. I said softly. What? Ethan asked. This house isn't just built from bricks, Ethan. It's built from choices. Every corner holds a memory of love, of pain, of forgiveness. And now, it holds redemption too. He smiled, a small, fragile smile. Then maybe we both get a second chance. Maybe, I said, turning off the sink. But this time, we'll build it on truth. That night, as I lay in bed, I whispered to the darkness, Richard, our boy finally found his way back. And for the first time in years, I slept peacefully, not because justice had been served, but because love, despite everything, had survived. Weeks passed. The snow outside the haven had thickened into a white, soft silence. Inside, the warmth of the fireplace fought against the cold memories that still lingered in every room. Ethan was slowly returning to himself, quieter, humbler, almost like the boy I once knew before greed had hollowed him out. I could see the guilt in his eyes whenever he looked at me, and though part of me wanted to scold him again, another part just wanted to let him heal. Because sometimes, silence can do what punishment never can. One morning, as I was folding laundry, Ethan came to me with a thick envelope in his hand. Mom, he said softly, I've been thinking. I can't stay here anymore. Not after everything I did. I looked up. And where will you go? I don't know yet, he admitted. Maybe rent an apartment closer to work. I need to start over. I need to prove I can live without taking from you. I hesitated. The mother in me wanted to tell him to stay, to protect him, feed him, fix his broken pieces. But the woman in me knew this was part of his redemption. I nodded slowly. If that's what you need, then go. But remember, this house will always be your home, just not your possession. He smiled faintly, his eyes watering. I understand now, Mom. I don't deserve to own it. I just hope someday I'll deserve your trust again. You will, I said quietly. But that kind of trust isn't given. It's earned one good choice at a time. He nodded, and for the first time in a long while, I saw something pure in his expression, sincerity. That night, I sat by the window as the snow fell softly outside, watching the lights flicker down the street. My reflection stared back at me, older, wiser, lonelier perhaps, but stronger too. I whispered to myself, you did it, Margaret. You survived them all, not through revenge, but through truth. The truth had saved me when love had failed. The next morning, Ethan packed his bags. I made breakfast, pancakes and bacon, his favorite since childhood. We sat together quietly, both pretending it was just another morning, though both of us knew it wasn't. Before leaving, he hugged me tightly, longer than usual. I'll come by every Sunday, he said. No more secrets, no more lies. I smiled through the tears I refused to let fall. Sunday dinner at 6. Don't be late. He nodded and left. The door closed behind him, and the sound echoed through the house, final but freeing. I looked around at the empty space and whispered, finally peace. The days that followed were peaceful but quiet. I went back to my routines. Morning tea, tending to the roses in the garden, reading near the fireplace at night. The loneliness didn't feel painful anymore. It felt earned. Sometimes, we lose people not because we stopped loving them, but because we finally started loving ourselves. One afternoon, while clearing out the storage room, I found an old wooden box labeled Richard's Files. Inside were old deeds, insurance papers, and letters he'd written years ago. Among them, I found one addressed to me, unopened. My hands trembled as I read his handwriting on the envelope. For Margaret, if I'm gone. I sat down and opened it carefully. The letter read, My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then life has taken me sooner than we hoped. I want you to remember something. This home you built, this dream we shared, is yours. It's the proof of your strength. Protect it, not because it's made of walls and windows, but because it holds your spirit. And if Ethan ever forgets what love means, teach him not through anger, but through patience. He's my son, and yours, and someday he'll understand asterisk. With love forever, Richard. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't the tears of heartbreak anymore. They were the kind that heal. He'd known. Even then, he'd known how I'd need those words someday. A few days later, Ethan called. His voice was lighter than before, though still humble. Mom, I got a small apartment. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. I wanted you to know I used my savings, not a cent of yours. I smiled. That's good, Ethan. I'm proud of you. There was silence on the other end. Then he said, I started therapy too, trying to understand why I let things get so far. My heart softened. That's the bravest thing you've ever done. Can I still come by Sunday? He asked, almost like a child seeking permission. Of course, I said. Dinner's waiting. That Sunday, true to his word, he came, carrying groceries, not just for himself, but for me. We cooked together, laughed about small things, and for the first time, the laughter didn't feel forced. It felt real. At the table, he looked around the house, the photos, the furniture, the garden outside the window, and said quietly, I used to think this house made us a family, but I was wrong. You did. I smiled. A house can't hold love, Ethan. Only hearts can. And when hearts are poisoned by greed, no home can survive. He nodded, eyes glistening. I'll never forget that again. After dinner, when he left, I stood at the doorway watching him walk down the snowy path, his figure fading into the white distance. I whispered softly, go find your peace, my son. I've already found mine. Then I closed the door, turned off the lights, and stood in the glow of the fireplace. This house, my haven, was more than mine again. It was sacred. It had witnessed love, betrayal, and finally truth. And in that truth, I found something far greater than victory. I found freedom. Winter began to fade. The snow outside the haven melted into thin streams that ran down the driveway, washing away the remnants of the past season. season. The garden, though barren, hinted at spring. A small bud here, a touch of green there. Inside, life moved quietly, rhythmically. Ethan kept his promise. Every Sunday at 6, he arrived for dinner, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with groceries, but always with humility. At first, our conversations were careful, almost fragile, like glass that might crack under the wrong word. But slowly, the tension melted. We started talking again, really talking, about everything from his job to my roses. And for the first time in years, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long while. Hope. One Sunday, he arrived early, holding an old photo album. "I found this while cleaning my apartment," he said with a small smile. It was our family album, old, worn, and heavy with memories. We sat together on the couch, flipping through its pages. There were photos of him as a child, laughing in the backyard, holding a garden hose, sitting on his father's shoulders. When we reached the picture of our old house before the Haven was built, he stopped. "You really gave up everything for me, didn't you?" I smiled softly. "I didn't give up, Ethan. I gave to. That's what mothers do. We don't sacrifice for recognition. We do it out of love. But love without respect eventually breaks." He nodded, his voice low. "I didn't respect it, Mom. I just thought love would always fix everything." "It doesn't," I said gently. "Love is powerful, but it needs truth to stand." He closed the album and looked at me. "Then from now on, I'll live by truth." Weeks passed peacefully. Ethan's visits became the highlight of my week. I could see real change in him, the kind that only comes from remorse and self-reflection. He'd started volunteering at a community shelter and talked about saving for his own house someday. Sometimes I'd watch him leave and whisper, maybe Richard was right, he just needed time. The old bitterness in my heart had begun to dissolve. I'd stopped seeing my home as a fortress to defend and started seeing it again as what it was meant to be, a place of healing. But peace, as I had learned, always comes at a price. One rainy afternoon, a letter arrived. I didn't recognize the handwriting, but the name on the envelope stopped my heart. Olivia Parker. I sat at the kitchen table for several minutes, just staring at it. Part of me wanted to throw it away unopened. Another part, the part that still believed closure was necessary, urged me to read it. Finally, I took a deep breath and tore it open. "Margaret, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve to be heard. But I wanted to say that I was wrong. Not just about the house, but about everything. I let my parents' greed guide me, and I used Ethan as my excuse. He loved me honestly, and I destroyed that. When I saw the look on his face at the hearing, I realized what I'd done. Not just to him, but to you. You were never weak, Margaret. You were patient, and that's something I'll never forget. I've moved away. I'm starting over. Please tell Ethan that I wish him peace. I know he won't forgive me, but I hope he heals. Asterisk. Olivia." I read it twice, then again, and by the third time, I wasn't angry anymore. Because sometimes, forgiveness isn't for the other person. It's for the part of you that refuses to carry their shadow any longer. That Sunday, Ethan came for dinner as usual. After we ate, I handed him the letter. He hesitated, then read it silently. When he finished, he didn't speak for a long time. Then he said quietly, "She finally told the truth." "Yes," I said. "And so did you." He looked up. "Do you hate her?" I shook my head. "No. Hatred is heavy, Ethan. I've carried enough of that. What she did will always hurt, but hate, no. I don't want that in this house anymore." He nodded slowly. "I think I understand now. Peace isn't something you find. It's something you decide." A small smile crossed my face. Exactly. Over the next few months, Ethan's life began to flourish. He got promoted at work, found new friends, and even joined a weekend hiking group. Every time he stopped by, I saw a spark in him that had been missing for years. The light of a man finally walking in his own truth. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he said, "You know, Mom, I used to think this house was cursed, that everything bad happened because of it." I chuckled. "And now I realize," he said thoughtfully, "it wasn't the house. It was us. The house just showed who we were. And now, it's showing who we've become." I looked at him with pride swelling in my chest. "You're finally becoming the man your father would have wanted you to be." He smiled faintly. "Maybe one day I'll build something like this, but with the right foundation this time." I placed my hand over his. That's all I ever wanted. Later that night, after he left, I walked through the Haven, touching the walls, the framed photos, the memories that refused to fade. This home had seen everything: love, betrayal, loss, redemption. It had been stolen, reclaimed, and finally restored, not by paperwork or courts, but by truth. I whispered to the empty rooms, "You've done well, old girl. You've stood strong." The fire crackled softly, and the scent of roses drifted in from the garden. Peace, quiet, fragile, but real, had finally settled in every corner. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt whole. Spring arrived quietly that year. The roses in my garden bloomed early, soft pinks, gentle whites, and deep reds that caught the sunlight like fire. Every petal felt like a reward from the universe, proof that even after the harshest winter, beauty returns. The Haven had survived it all: storms, deceit, betrayal. Yet it still stood tall, peaceful, alive. Just like me. It had been 6 months since the court case. Life had found a rhythm again. Ethan still visited every Sunday without fail. Each time, he brought something new. Sometimes a new dish he'd learned, sometimes just stories about his week. I could see the difference in him. His eyes carried light again. He laughed easily, spoke honestly, and most of all, he listened. That was the truest sign of his change. He listened. One Sunday evening, as we sat on the porch drinking tea, he said, "You know, Mom, every time I come here, it feels like coming home for the first time again. I smiled. That's what homes are for. Not ownership, not pride, but belonging. He nodded thoughtfully. I've been saving up, you know. Maybe one day I'll build a small house of my own. Nothing fancy, just something that's mine. I looked at him with quiet pride. Then build it with your own hands, Ethan. And build it with honesty. Because the foundation you lay in truth will never crack, no matter who tries to take it. He smiled softly. I learned that from you. After he left that night, I sat alone by the fireplace. The soft hum of the clock filled the air, steady and comforting. I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the humiliation, and then the justice, the redemption, and now this peace. So many people had told me to sell the house after the ordeal. Too many bad memories, they said, but I never could. This house wasn't cursed. It was tested. It had become my testament, my living story. The Haven had become more than property. It was a symbol of endurance, of truth, of a mother's strength when love is tested by greed. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. One morning, a letter arrived from the courthouse. For a moment, my heart skipped. After everything, that seal still made me nervous. But when I opened it, it wasn't about a dispute. It was about my will. The court had confirmed that the outdated will was officially recorded. The line I'd written, "This house belongs only to those who truly loved me," was now part of the legal document. I smiled as I read it again. That single line carried the weight of everything I'd endured. It was more than a sentence. It was my truth. That evening, I sat down to write a letter of my own, one that I'd keep with my will, sealed for Ethan to read someday after I was gone. It read, "My dearest son, you once gave away what was never yours to give, but you also did something greater. You found your way back. That is what matters. This house was built from sacrifice, but it survived because of truth. One day, when I'm gone, you'll stand in these rooms and hear the echoes of every lesson life taught us. If you ever doubt yourself, look around you at these walls, this garden, this home. They're living proof that mistakes don't define you. What you do after them does. Remember, love is never ownership. It's stewardship. You protect what's given to you, not claim it. The Haven will always be yours to live in, but never to sell. Because this home doesn't belong to money or law or inheritance. It belongs to love. Asterisk. Mom." I folded it carefully and placed it in the safe beside the title deed. Then I locked it. My hands didn't tremble anymore. They were steady, steady with peace, steady with purpose. Months went by, and life continued quietly. The neighbors often stopped by to chat, and everyone seemed to notice how bright the Haven looked again. "You brought it back to life, Margaret," Mrs. Dalton said one afternoon. I smiled. "No," I replied. "It brought me back." I started baking again, gardening, even volunteering at the church library. It felt good to live without fear, without tension, to open the door in the morning and know that every inch of his home, every nail, every brick was still mine, not because of possession, but because of persistence. One late afternoon, Ethan came by holding a small wrap box. "Mom," he said shyly, "this is for you." Inside was a brass nameplate. It read, "The Haven, established with love, protected by truth." I felt tears sting my eyes as I ran my fingers over the words. "It's beautiful," I whispered. He smiled. "It's what this house deserves. What you deserve." We installed it right by the front door, polished and shining in the sunset. As we stood there, side by side, I realized that this moment, simple, quiet, unremarkable to anyone else, was the real ending of my story. Not the court, not the betrayal, not even the forgiveness. It was this, standing with my son, in peace, beside the home that survived everything. That night, as I lay in bed, the moonlight poured through the window, gentle and soft. I whispered to the stillness, "You were right, Richard." He understood in the end, and I smiled, because sometimes justice doesn't look like victory. It looks like healing. It sounds like silence after shouting. It feels like peace after pain. The Haven was safe. My heart was safe. And for the first time in my life, I truly understood silence isn't weakness. It's patience, waiting for truth's perfect time.